Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. With the Gaza ceasefire in its first week and the Lebanon one in its last, although it will most likely be extended, the Iran-Israel confrontation has now entered a new phase. For the first time since October 7th, the guns and missiles have fallen silent, with even the Houthis announcing that they will hold their fire. This, of course, is not the end of the affair, but rather a waiting period in which the parties judge each other and prepare for a decision by President Donald Trump regarding his policy on Tehran's military nuclear aspirations and regional activities. How can this lull between storms be put to best use? Here with us to help analyze this question are Colonel in Reserve Mili Eisen, who formerly served as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. She was also an advisor at the Prime Minister's office and currently a senior fellow at the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University. It's good to see you, Miri.
Shalom, Jonathan.
Shalom, shalom. Also joining us is the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, namely Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish. It's good to see you, Doron.
Good to see you, Jonathan.
And last but not least, Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, formerly the IDF Chief of Cyber Staff and Israel Air Force Commander, as well as a fighter pilot. It's always a pleasure to see you as well, Yaron.
Good to see you, Jonathan.
Well, let's start. The topic in question is the Islamic Republic of Iran. It did not roll over and succumb to the various hits that it suffered. Nevertheless, Colonel Eisen, when you look at the Islamic Republic, what are we to expect in the near to medium period, particularly from Israel's perspective?
From the Israeli perspective, first and foremost, the Islamic regime of Iran is exactly as it was before October 7th. In what way? They still aspire to export their version of the Islamic regime. They still have the strong connections with all of the different proxies that we talk about so often, the different Shiite groups inside Iraq, the different Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. But some things have changed dramatically. And first and foremost for them is the conduit, the Syrian Bashar Assad capabilities. And in that sense, I think that in the near future, what the Islamic regime needs to build for itself, we need to try to stop that, of course. They need to build their new way of resupplying Hezbollah in Lebanon, of reconnecting with the Iraqi Shiites in Iraq. It's easier for them in Iraq. They share a border. There's a lot of common aspects there. But right now, for the Islamic regime to reconnect, to really advance their main proxy, their main protege, which is Hezbollah in Lebanon, that was so heavily hit by Israel, they need to build a new supply route. They need to build a way where they show, not only as far as they're concerned that they won, but that Hezbollah can be built again. They are going to try to pour in money to rebuild Lebanon. They're going to show that they are still a player. And these are all things we need to be aware of in the upcoming months to make sure that they don't happen.
General Gavish, when we're talking about the Islamic Republic, the RGC Commander-in-Chief, namely Hussein Salami, alongside also Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, came out and said, the attack against Israel, which they pledged would happen following the October 26th strike that rendered their surface-to-air capabilities incapacitated alongside much of their capacity to produce new ballistic missiles, does not shy away from their intentions to launch yet another attack against Israel. To what degree, within the capacity of your task force, is Israel prepared for whatever they are preparing themselves?
Well, the answer is, if I've learned something from my colleagues from CENTCOM, they have this way of starting a meeting by saying, let's start with a bluff. Bottom line up front. So bottom line up front, the answer is yes. I think that the defense of Israel is well prepared. We have to remember that we are talking about the array of capability, and the air defense structure of Israel is being enhanced during this war by our friends and brothers from CENTCOM. So when we are talking about the defense against Iran, we are talking about the multi-tier defense here in Israel, which is the Arrow 2, the Arrow 3, the David Sling, the Iron Dome. You combined into it the Aegis ships, and there are some of them in the Mediterranean and also in the Red Sea, together with the FAT system, everything together. This is what contains the multi-tier defense. We have to remember that Hezbollah is not part of the game as it was before. And of course, if it would decide to be, we would be also prepared to this. So there are a lot of options, of course, but the IDF, together with the CENTCOM, is prepared from this point of view to all the different options. We should say it humbly, but we believe that we are prepared. We also could look, toward April and October. The Iranians tried to shoot toward Israel. The Yemenis are trying to shoot in the last few months. They shot tens of ballistic missiles toward Israel, and the vast majority of them were intercepted. The last thing that I would say is that it is not all about the defense. When we're talking about fighting Iran, when we're talking about fighting the ballistic missiles threat, we are talking also about attack capabilities, alert capabilities, and the passive defense of Israel. So you combine all of those together, and again, looking back, we had 37,000 rockets and missiles that were shot toward Israel. The combination between our attack capability, alert capability, active defense, and passive defense, meaning the orders that are being issued by the on-front command, and the behavior of the Israeli population, all of those brought us to a point that the amount of people that were hurt, you could really count them in two hands. So I'm talking about those that were killed from this threat during this war. So saying all of that, bottom line up front now, bottom line at the end, we believe that we are ready. We will say it humbly, and it is not only about the defense.
General Rosen, General Gavi spoke about the offensive dimension. Israel is also preparing for a potential contingency when we're talking about Iran's nuclear aspirations. Its program is at its most advanced stage when we're talking about breaking out towards nuclear weapon capabilities. What are we to take into consideration from that perspective?
We're going into a new phase. The administration in the U.S. has changed. We have a new president. Israel has changed the Middle East, along with Turkey's investment in everything that is going on in Syria. Things are changing. So now we are in a phase that I would call a duel of visions. We have competing, not only competing narratives, but competing visions of how the future looks in the Middle East. I think that Israel needs to make sure that none of the extreme exists. So if it's a Shiite extreme or a Sunni extreme, not good for Israel, that is what Israel needs to take care of. On the competition between two Sunni futures, one of them is mostly, I would say, Turkey, Syria, and Qatar. That's one future that we can see. And the second one is a more Saudi, Egyptian, Jordanian, Lebanese future. Okay? Two very different things. And actually, it also represents, I think it represents also two different generations. The Turkish generation, Recep Erdogan is the old, from the old regime, let's call it. And you have MBS, which is 39 years old. This person is changing the KSA, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, And he has a very different vision for Saudi Arabia than how Recep Erdogan sees the neo-Ottoman side, from his side. So I think what we're going to see in the next 6 months or so is going to be around the following. A, Iran is under huge pressure internally. Just in the last few days, a few clerics were killed. Internally, we're talking about internal clashes in the cities, protests, the inflation. A few IRGC clerics were killed, high judges. I don't remember the exact name of how you call them. There are real pressures around the supreme leader. That is one thing. Iran is in huge trouble. On one hand, it can reach back to the proxies. I don't think it's gonna happen in the next few months. They just don't have the power to do it right now. They're desperate. The second thing that's going to be in their minds is, do we run for the nuclear project? I think they're not going to do that because they have a new president in the United States, and that is the connection to Israel. Israel and the United States are going to have to decide if this is a good time for the checkmate. I think it is. And then the Middle East has completely changed. And from there on, different stories. That's how I would look at the next 6 months or so.
Colonel Eisen, I'd like to hear your take on this. I do agree with certain angles, less so about other angles, but one of the points that I do think is that the Iranians are very keen-eyed when they're seeing the various changes in the Middle East and getting into those cracks. One of the points that we do need to highlight is the fact that the Trump administration has yet to unveil its foreign policy for the Middle East. It's too early to tell what its various objectives are. Nonetheless, one thing we do know, and that is the maximum pressure campaign is going to be reinvigorated, particularly on the leg of enforcement, which the Biden administration was lacking at with regard to the export of oils to China, with various elements, particularly related also to the energy sector. But beyond that, we're seeing various activities that are going to be hit quite strongly. But one of the points that is also, which I would raise myself, is when we're talking about Syria, the Kurdish areas, the United States, prior to the fall of the Assad regime, was speaking about disengaging from those territories as part of Operation Inherent Resolve. In the event that something like this happens, Iran, which houses the headquarters of the PKK in its territory, could try and utilize bad actors to try and confront Turkey from that side, and Damascus for that matter. Is that in the cards from what we can identify, at least within the geostrategic sphere?
Jonathan, I didn't agree with some of the things that Yaron was talking about, and so I'm going to both zoom out and zoom in. Because yes, we're in the Middle East, and yes, it's about Turkey that's in the Middle East, and Iran that's in the Middle East, and Saudi Arabia. But as soon as you bring in the United States under the new Trump administration, I also need to zoom out and say Iran is now in a strategic alliance with Russia, with China, with North Korea. So I had to zoom out for a moment. And so I'm all for more sanctions. And I'm saying, how effective can sanctions be if China's going to buy the oil, if North Korea is going to take the different things? Meaning we're in a very challenging situation when it comes right now to how effective that can be. Second aspect that I'm pushing back a bit at, there's absolutely an economic crisis inside Iran. I'm going to pose it as a question rather than as an exclamation mark. What does that do to the people? Are we going to see now more of what's going to be something that's going to change inside Iran? I think that most Iranians actually want nuclear capability. I could disagree with them from here to eternity, but I don't think that that turns them off. I think that they have a right to it, that they think that they are the oppressed and they're the underdogs, and that in that sense they need to have it. So I wonder in that sense on what they're willing to give up when it comes to the fact that they don't have electricity now, even though they have oil reserves and gas reserves, and yet they can't get electricity in their homes. I'm not sure where that's going to go. I still think that the Islamic regime, not just in its rhetoric, But in what it wants to do now, after the high-intensity portion of this war is over, they need to show that Hezbollah is still around. They need to show that they can back all of their proxies, so that I do see that as being one of the first things they're going to take care of. Having said that, I don't know for a fact, and I do think that it's the strategic alliance that they export weapons to Russia, that right now Russia, both with North Koreans fighting with Russia, that North Korean, Russia, China, together with Iran is something which I see very disturbing towards the Middle East, because, Jonathan, as both of us know, somebody has to rebuild Lebanon. Somebody has to completely rebuild Gaza. And as Yaron mentioned before, Qatar could rebuild Gaza. Who's going to rebuild Lebanon? And I say that because Iran's going to want to step in there. At the end, over half of the Lebanese are Shiites. So I just add that in. I'm not sure where it's going to go, because none of us know yet, at least not in a clear way, where the U.S. administration is going with this.
With regard to Qatar being able to rebuild Gaza, it will come at the expense of Syria and Lebanon, of course. But when we're talking about this, the Saudis are a lot more influential in Lebanon than the Qataris, which is a good thing for Israel, at least. But when we're talking about Syria, the Qataris are very keen on at least investing in parts of Syria. But there is so much devastation there that even the Qatari treasury cannot fulfill all the needs of the Syrian people, and therefore they do need to play ball with Western civilization at a time when, of course, also Turkey is in a very tough economic situation. But going back to the Iranian file vis-a-vis Russia, we did hear the U.S. envoy for Ukraine under the Trump administration say prior to entering office that Iran is a key component to be dealt with in order to further enhance leverage over the Ukraine-Russia aspect, something that was taken note of. And, of course, the last meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian indicated a deepening of the strategic relationship also on the nuclear file. And therefore, I'd like to ask you, General Kavish, when we're looking at the deepening of the strategic relations between Russia and Iran proper, what are we to expect from this dimension?
Well, Jonathan, I think you've touched a very important point from the operational angle, but also from the strategic angle. When it comes to the United States, we have to remember that although we are talking about Iran, for United States, the real story is China and Russia and how those things are being tied together. So Iran, it is our big story, but Iran is part of the U.S. Story. So the relation between Russia and Iran, this is something which is, of course, very important. On the operational side, we have to remember that the Russians still have some capabilities and some knowledge that we don't want them to provide this knowledge to the Iranians. And this is something that is very important from our side. From the other side, we have to remember that the Iranians are arming the Russians for the war in Ukraine. So these relations are very strong, but there is also some different angles if it comes to that, because in Syria, for example, the interests of the Russians and the Iranians are not fully aligned. So from one hand, this is a challenging cooperation for us, for the United States. From the other hand, even between them, they have some challenges because the different way of looking at things, different interests when it comes to different regions within the Middle East. So it still, like Colonel Eisen said, the options are so many. Our region is restructuring itself, and it's very hard to have this crystal ball and to say exactly what would happen. We have to be basically humble in our visioning how it's going to be, but we could do whatever we can in order to make it as close as we can to our interests. And this is, of course, one of the main, I think, goals of Israel and the United States in the region, because there are some prospects over there, but this is a different question from Russia and Iran.
General Rosen, ultimately, the United States is going to look at the Middle East from a geostrategic level perspective, at least something that I'm sure that we'll all agree on. And therefore, when we know that the Chinese have invested $400 billion over the course of a 25-year period in Iranian infrastructure, something that there was a domestic outcry over this fact. They have also clear interests in the Iranian energy market, as well as the raw materials that the Iranians are exporting in the direction of Iran. Naturally, we can expect the Chinese not to just sit idly by and allow Iran to collapse fully, since this would waste a lot of billions from their own perspective. How do we expect the Chinese to play in this role, and how could the United States potentially also counter that?
That's exactly the point. We have a new administration, and the new administration is coming in to make a point. Things that were happening in the Middle East were happening not by chance. They were happening because the most important global player, the United States of America, was playing a very weak strategy. So all of this was happening. All of what we were seeing was happening until January 20th, yesterday. Now, the question is, what will the United States do from today and on? That is exactly the question. I think that Iran needs to be under huge pressure. So the maximum pressure on the economic side will really make it hard and put a lot of pressure on Iran because it is economically broken. And it doesn't matter how much money pours into Iran. When you have a 300% inflation, it's not helpful. If Israel and the US decide to go for the checkmate for the nuclear program, basically Iran becomes a liability to all the China, because now the United States is signaling something on the global stage, and this is signaling to Taiwan. Okay, this is something that I'm not saying will happen, but if the United States decides to change its policy in the Middle East, it has to have a meaning. What is that meaning? How does that look? What is it going to, how are we going to see different things happening? That's exactly what the new administration should be thinking about right now. If the new administration, let's say, does nothing, does not attack the nuclear program, it just does the maximum pressure from an economic standpoint, and lets the Turkish crescent come into Syria and also influence Lebanon, we might see something which is counterproductive to the United States in the Middle East. We won't see stability. So the United States has to decide how it will change the course or enhance what happened in the last 3 or 4 months in the Middle East. Namely, what do we do? What does the United States do with Iran besides the maximum economic pressure? A. B. I don't think Iran needs to be allowed to go back into Lebanon. It's Iran working for 30%. The Shiites are only 35% of Lebanon. I think we changed the internal Lebanese politics, and therefore the United States has to insist that Iran does not rearm Hezbollah, period. That is something that is feasible and is possible in the new era that we are in, and so on and so forth with the other players. And I think it's going to look different. I don't know exactly how. As my friend said, I don't have the crystal ball as well, but I have a feeling that things will change more than they were the same, because otherwise This administration is doing exactly as the last administration, and I don't think that's the case with Trump.
Well, I can say with full confidence those crystal balls don't work. I am not a prophet, though, so that doesn't really matter. But nonetheless, let's have a brief analysis. What are we to expect in the near future? Unfortunately, we lost connection with General Gavish, but nonetheless, Colonel Eisen and General Rosen, you have roughly 25 seconds each. Go ahead, Colonel Eisen.
I think that Iran wants to show its status. I think we need to block that. I think Iran wants to resupply its proxies, and that's more than one. We need to stop that. When I say we, I'm talking about us, but it's about the United States of America. It's about the new administration. There are a lot of different ways that can be done. Part of that is in building these new alliances, because the Middle East in 2025, after the fall of Bashar Assad, after the enormous hit that Hezbollah, that Iranian proxy, took, is a new world, and we can impact it.
General Rosen?
First of all, denying the rearming of any Iranian proxy, and secondly, enhancing the stability with the United States funds and relevant allies such as Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan and Lebanon to enhance a different future for the Middle East, allowing Turkey to invest some in the rearming of northern Syria more than the whole of Syria. That's how I would put it.
Well, this is all the time that we have today. I'd like to immediately thank General Rosen, General Gavish in absentia, and Colonel Eisen for all of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.